Welcome to Smart Women Talk. This is your host, Katana Abbott. I'm a midlife millionaire coach and a certified financial planner, and I search the world for smart women and a few good men, including best-selling authors and thought leaders who are on that leading edge. So join us for conversations on money, business, health, and inspiration, so you can live with more purpose, passion, and prosperity. Welcome to Smart Women Talk. This is your host, Katana Abbott, and today we're going to be speaking with artist Gerarda Pizzarello about how she overcame MS through alternative healing. I met Gerarda, and she told me a story about being healed and putting her MS into remission. So I asked her to please come on the show this month because we've been talking about autoimmune. So she's going to talk about how that all happened and how she's kept it in remission for 30 years. She's also going to share with us why detox is the first step to creating a level playing field and the role that nutrition and diet play in rebuilding and rebalancing the body. So first, let me tell you a little bit about Gerarda. She is a graduate of Rutgers University, Douglas College, with a dual BA degrees in English and Sociology. She is also an alumni of Juilliard School in New York City, where she studied theatrical painting and stagecraft. So she spent her early career working on operas, plays, independent films in New York, New Jersey, and Washington, D.C. area. Her film career began by working with Director John Sayles on his 1996 film Lone Star. As a member of the United Scenic Artists, her professional career spanned across Broadway, opera at the Metropolitan Opera, network television, and feature films. So after more than a decade in show business, she turned her attention to work in the private sector, where she is today. So Gerarda, I'm so thrilled that you agreed to come here and share your personal story, because this whole month, our theme has been autoimmune and healing the body from inside out. And I had professionals on, and I wanted to share, you're just a normal person out there like the rest of us working, and you were struck with MS at a young age, and you somehow, a miracle occurred, is how I would say it. You know, it sounded like a miracle. And today, many, many decades later, you are still in remission. Can you share your story, and how did you find out you even had an autoimmune disease?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much for having me, Katana. I mean, this is something that's really close to my heart, because my diagnosis came in the late 1990s, early 2000s. And a lot of what I learned then is only now hitting the radar of people. I mean, that's how long it's taken for society to adopt this new perspective about healing. And so to that extent, I really appreciate the opportunity to share this, because I'm not a health professional. Like you said, I'm just an ordinary person who got a pretty devastating diagnosis at an early age. And it really rocks your foundation when you get told something like that. I mean, I was pretty young. Prior to my diagnosis, my mother had been struggling with cancer, and I had just bought my first home. I was at the height of my career. So there was a lot of going on in life. And I point that out just because I've come to learn how important the role of stress is in any medical situation. And I've only learned that with hindsight. You know, at the time when I was in the thick of things, I didn't think twice about all of those things happening at once. But I think that what I learned was that, you know, when you have a predisposition to anything in your body, the stress is what definitely tips the scale. And I think we now have an appreciation of the level of what stress can do to our bodies. But back then, other than heart disease, people really didn't talk about stress as a medical condition, you know? So that being said, I got my diagnosis. I was experiencing all of a sudden this weird thing with my eyes. I couldn't focus. it was just, I couldn't walk right. It was just so disorienting. My whole body was like suddenly not working right. And so I went to the doctor and he said, "Ooh, I think you need to go see a neurologist, you know?" So I went to the neurologist, and at that time they had their typical protocols. You know, they diagnosed you based on your symptoms. They then said, well, the next step would be to like get an MRI of your brain, or we could do like a tap of your spinal fluid, because we have a theory that you have MS based on your symptoms. And so you're like, whoa, okay. And so I agreed to get an MRI of my brain because that was the least invasive. And sure enough, there were what they call hotspots or signs of exacerbations on the brain. And so that kind of confirmed the diagnosis. And I really wasn't interested in having them puncture my spine for any reason. And so then that was when the conversations started, the medical conversations. You know, these are your options. A, it's a devastating disease. And, you know, you really need to understand that. And I was like, okay. And then they're like, well, the prognosis is really challenging. We don't yet know what kind of MS you have. And these are what we do for people like you. So their protocol at that time was to put me on a course of injectables, these injectable drugs that you put in your body that they said would prevent future exacerbations from happening. And why that was important is because MS is a neurological disease. It's an autoimmune disease where the body basically is attacking itself, and it's specifically attacking like the electrical circuitry of your body. And that can have hugely debilitating effects. It can affect your vision, it can affect your ability to walk, it's affecting your brain. So this is serious. And I would never underestimate the gravity of that. But what is different is when you stop, when you get a diagnosis like that, and you hear what the treatments are, you know, putting yourself on these drugs, and then you read what the side effects of the drugs are. At that time, it was like suicidal tendencies, you know, this whole long list, you know, blowing out your kidney, your liver disease, all these other things. And I thought, oh, this is really bad. In any which way I looked, it just looked really bad. And I was getting depressed. And so I went to, my doctor said, well, why don't you go to one of these workshops at the local health center? You know, it's a big conference about MS, go to it. You'll find out what resources are available to you. And I was like, oh, that's a great idea. Thank you. This is my GP who I love. And so I went to this medical conference, and that just plummeted me into a depression about this, because it was, you won't be able to walk. So here's what canes are available. When you're not able to walk fully, here's what wheelchairs are available to you. And I was just like, what? I'm fine. I had a problem with my eyes. I have a problem walking. Yeah, there's something wrong. But I just felt like it was like this giant umbrella of doom. And I was really freaked out. And luckily for me at that time, and this is the miraculous part, really, I had a girlfriend who I had been working with. She had opened her home as a meditation center, and I was going there regularly and meditating. And she had this great room. And I mean, it was a big room where we could hold meditations. And because I was an artist, she said to me, oh, this room would be great if it had a ceiling mural, a beautiful ceiling mural. So I looked at this giant room, like 27 feet by 19 feet wide. And I was like, oh, that would be big fun. Let me do that. So I had done this mural, and I was a part of this community, and people had come and sat in this meditation center and looked up at this mural and were really affected by it. And one of the people, along with the woman whose home it was another woman who had a friend whose child had cancer, like a really bad cancer. And they were here in the United States, up in the Boston area. And they were trying to do everything they could for their child, as any parent would. And in their journey, they ended up in Switzerland at this clinic. And the doctor there, Dr. Thomas Rau, and the clinic is the Paracelsus Clinic. It's located in Lusmuli, Switzerland. The doctor did miraculous things with this young man and basically healed him from his cancer. And they were just like, we didn't even know this kind of treatment existed. And that's basically all I really knew at the time. And what they said to me was, Gerarda, this doctor's doing miraculous things. You don't feel so good about this diagnosis and what is available to you. Maybe you should look in a different direction. And I thought, okay, but I don't know how to do that. And I certainly, don't know I don't know anything about this place. Everything was scary at that point. So this group of people they literally sent me to Switzerland, to the Paracelsus Clinic. And I just went out of trust and love of these people because I was so mentally depleted by this diagnosis. And went there, and the original course of treatment was for 3 weeks. So it was a big commitment to go there for 3 weeks. I went alone, and it was like stepping into like a sci-fi movie, because I, am just an average person. I live in New Jersey. I was used to the medical protocols that everyone's exposed to here. And this was just such a major point of departure. They had a very different view of disease. They had a very different view of treating it. It was definitely based in science, because a lot of people, when I would come back to the United States, were like, oh, that's just like a spa. Like, we've heard of spas. You're off at a spa. Of course you feel better. And I was like, no, they were doing serious scientific work. And what I learned from that experience there was, the first thing was that they looked at you as an individual. So they, I showed up in Switzerland with all of my brain scans and all of my everything, and they didn't look at a single thing. And I was a little freaked out by that. And they were like, no, that's okay. But they did all their own blood work. They had their series of protocols that they put you on right away. And the doctor, and actually it was the first place that actually had done a genetic test. So think about that. This is in the late 90s. They were already looking at my genetic profile as an individual. So when people would say, oh, it was a spa, I was like, no, you don't understand what's going on here. This is not a spa. This is hard work. But so they did their own forms of testing, and they had other kinds of testing like I had never seen before, which was they did a lot of work with live blood samples. Now, I don't know how many people have seen that here in the United States. Now it's a little more common, but they literally would prick your ear and put a drop of blood on a slide and put it under this high-powered microscope called dark field microscopy, and they looked at your blood in real time. So they could see what was bacteria, what were, other funguses that were in there, how your white blood cells were they clustering, how your red blood cells were moving. I mean, they were literally looking at your blood and the vitality of it right in that moment to give them a snapshot. And it was amazing, even just that idea versus just getting your blood drawn from your body and having it sent away to a lab. They did that as well, and they did a really extensive blood profile. But what their point was basically, you have this diagnosis of MS, and it's a chronic inflammatory disease. Okay, we're going to look at you personally, not MS, because that's just a diagnosis. We're going to look at you and see what is allowing this vulnerability to manifest into illness. So they were not so afraid of the MS. They were like, okay, you got MS. Okay, we know what you got. That's a great starting point. They didn't have that same doom and gloom about it. Theirs was really a theory that, with their paradigm of healing, was all about, first step is detoxifying the body. Second step is upbuilding the body. And then third step is really putting you on a platform to keep yourself at maximum health and balance, because then any vulnerability in your body won't really be manifested. So no, we're not going to cure your MS. This is just a part of who you are. It's a vulnerability, but we can make you as healthy as you can be so it becomes a non-issue. Nobody was thinking that way in the United States.
And it sounds like, Gerarda, I love your story. And as you're telling it, I can actually just visualize and see you there, but it is the opposite of what we are told when we have a diagnosis. And it gave you a lot of hope. But would this be considered functional medicine then? They want to look at the source and why did this come on? Because apparently it was in your body and your genes, or just somehow it manifested. So what was the protocol like that they put you on? Was there anything specific? Because I'm sure that any of us listening that have an autoimmune, what you're going to share with us could help all of us.
Yeah, like I say, my experience, you have to always put it back in the context of how early on this was. This was decades ago. So the term functional medicine wasn't even as pervasive as it is today. And Dr. Rao was one of the forerunners of functional medicine. But basically what he referred to, what he was doing, was he called it biological medicine. And basically it's the same thing. He was trained and ran many clinics in Switzerland that had to do with arthritis and other joint diseases. That's where he sort of started out. And I asked him how he got to doing biological medicine as a practice. And he said to me that what he did, because he was trained as an MD the traditional way, he said what separated him from the way he was trained was he actually started asking his patients who got better, because he was doing all the traditional things to treat arthritis of every magnitude. He said, but I listened to my patients that got better and said, what are you doing? And they would say, well, I'm doing what you told me. And he said, no, what are you really doing? And he said, what he discovered was there was a whole other set of stuff that these people were doing. They were doing their vitamins. They were doing yoga. They were, evaluating their life choices and stressors in their life on top of doing the medical stuff. And he began to integrate all of those other modalities into his treatment process. So he was doing the science, but he was also understanding the role of toxicity. So what are the toxins that are stressing out our body? He was looking at nutrition. What are they doing to support their body? What are they doing vitamin-wise? What are they doing to help their body heal, even psychologically, from traumas, from life? And he started building this, what he called biological medicine, which was what we call now functional medicine, a more integrated, holistic approach, where he would look at you, the individual, but he would also keep in mind all these other things. And so he was having tremendous success rates because he was one of the first people that immediately, when you went to this clinic, there was a dietary protocol. In fact, they often had you stay in only a few certain hotels in the area, one of which was linked directly to the clinic, because they immediately put you on their diet. And at first I was like, what? Like, is this a cult or something? Like, it was just, it was so out of normal. Like when you go to a hospital, you get horrible food. Here, they're making you stay in a hotel because they didn't it's not a hospital, it's a clinic. You go there to get treated, but then you would go back to the hotel. And they had a very strict dietary protocol. It was all very nutrition, organic, freshly cooked. They immediately eliminated alcohol. They immediately eliminated dairy. They immediately eliminated sugar. There was obviously no processed foods of any sort. And when I asked Dr. Rao why he made us go on this, what seemed to me a radical diet, because I'm from America where we have McDonald's on every corner, he was like, oh, because it sets a level playing field. He says, it doesn't matter what's wrong with you. I just know by getting all my patients in this kind of environment, I immediately reduce the stressors on their body. So even if you're not gluten intolerant, it's just one stressor that I can take away. Even if sugar may not be an aggravator for you, I'm taking it away.
So you didn't mention gluten, but they took you off gluten as well. So gluten, dairy, sugar, and alcohol, gone.
Gone.
Okay.
And they also got rid of pretty much, I would say 99% of meat protein. Occasionally, once a week, they would, give you some salmon or maybe some chicken on the weekend. But most of your proteins came from other sources, because that was the other thing Dr. Rao had discovered, is that in America in particular, we were all over-proteined. We ate way too many ounces of protein for what our bodies could metabolize. And that in itself is its own stressor. Mm. So, so what that did by putting all of us on that diet, it got all of us onto a less inflamed body, because one of the things about most diseases, especially things like MS, cancers, whatever have you, they're, and any autoimmune disease, it's really a discussion of an inflammatory state in your body. So the diagnosis is really a diagnosis of inflammation, and it has a bunch of symptoms. And MS has its cluster of symptoms depending on the people, and cancer has its cluster of symptoms and manifestations. But at its core, your body's overwhelmed. And so the diet was one form of detoxifying and upbuilding at the same time. Then they also did other forms of detoxing. They looked at whether you had heavy metal poisoning, like toxicity from mercury, the amalgams in your teeth. They actually have linked to the clinic is also a dental unit. So think about this. This was in the late 90s. They had the clinic, they had the restaurant, hotel, cafeteria, and they had a dental facility, all working together on top of practitioners that dealt with your emotional issues, the trauma from the diagnosis you were dealing with, plus all the other things in life that were another form of toxic burden to you. This was unheard of.
And before you were diagnosed, you were working a lot of hours and under a lot of stress. I remember you mentioning that. And that is like typical of so many Americans. We don't take a break. We don't go, people brag they don't go on vacation in US.
100%. And that's why at the beginning I said, put in context the fact that I had a very sick mother who I adored. That's devastating to have somebody who's sick, but somebody who you adore and have them be sick is just profound. Having, a new home, thinking you're finally stepping into your own as an adult, and then having that stress on top of that, and then the career thing. So it was kind of like a mental triple whammy on top of my body, which actually had some heavy metal toxicities. It did have a genetic vulnerability to MS, which they told me about in the 90s. And I remember when Dr. Rao got the genetic test back, because he was so much like a little kid. For him, this was a joyful excursion. Like, how am I going to fix you? How can I help you? And he was like, oh, good. We discovered, this about your genetics. And I was like, and he was like, no, now we know how to work around it. Mm-hmm. We know how to support that or work around it and get your body up and running properly. Like, he never saw anything in a defeatist way. Yeah. It was truly inspiring because he was so committed to the science. So everything for him was just another part of the puzzle, another slice of information that helped him target how best to help you as an individual. And that was profound.
So were you there just the one time, or did you end up going back multiple times?
The first time you go, the average person, because as Dr. Rao used to say, oh, I get all the throwaways. I get all the worst patients that everybody else has given up on, and has tremendous success. And I'm talking people with cancers, all kinds of diseases, not just MS. The first time he really, really wants you to be there for no less than 3 weeks. If you can do a full month or even longer, the better, because the idea of getting your body back to a healthy, balanced state before you even heal it, just like getting rid of all the stressors, takes time. It's not like...
How much time do we get? We get 15 minutes here in the United States. How long did it take for you to go in and talk to your doctor and have him give you that diagnosis and then leave the room?
Exactly.
And then you're supposed to get these injections, and that's your treatment. Such a difference. Hearing this, it breaks my heart that that's what we're stuck with. And I'm just going to say this, that it's because our whole country is run by pharmaceutical companies. So they teach the doctors, they run the hospitals, the universities, and, just turn on the television and see the commercials right now. It's just horrible. Yeah. So I'm so thrilled you've agreed to come here and share this, to show people this really does work. And that's why this month I'm so thrilled. We had Margie Bissinger talking about osteopenia and osteoporosis, and Dr. Tom O'Brien, who has a 9-part docuseries where he interviewed, I think, 80 different functional medicine doctors across the world, because they have these big conferences. So he was able to interview all these people, that there is hope.
Oh, there's a tremendous amount of hope. I mean, when I came back from Switzerland, just to finish up on your first question though.
Yes.
There for the full 3 weeks. And I really think that was, as he said, you needed that amount of time just to get the initial foundation. I did bring home treatments from Switzerland that I then had to find people here to help me with at first. And I did go back for what I would call tune-ups. I would go back regularly for the first couple years and spend a couple weeks there every year. I think after my first treatment, I went back 6 months later for 2 weeks, and then the following year for 2 weeks. And then I slowly petered off, because one of the things about Dr. Rao, because he's truly a healer, a doctor who's a healer, he wants you well, is that his goal is to not have you as a patient. He doesn't need patients. Right? He doesn't have enough time in the day for the people he wants to work with. So his goal is to have you not be his patient. So the approach is to really get you well and give you all the information you need to keep yourself healthy.
So today you are actually symptom free. When you, let's say, go into year 2, and now tell us about how your life was at that point. Did you have any symptoms anymore of MS?
No.
So you're living a normal life. Did you keep the protocols up? Did you follow that for life?
No, I'm definitely a follow it for life thing. After the first year, everything had calmed down in my body, plus some. So not only did I feel better and didn't have any symptoms, I actually felt better than I ever felt, because it was my whole body was sort of breathing a sigh of relief and feeling good for the first time. Because what I learned is a lot of what was going on with me was accumulative, and it was like my body had hit the wall and it just was breaking down. And by going to him at that point in time, it's like we stopped that in its tracks, and we then started to reverse it by getting myself healthy. And so I would go in for my, annual visit with Dr. Rao, and sometimes I only went even for a week, and he was so sad. He's like, oh, but I love when you come in and we can talk. And I was like, I do too, but I'm kind of glad I don't have to be your patient anymore. But the clinic was really designed in a way that you had the ability to teach yourself and to learn to listen to your body, because that's the one thing we're never taught, is to listen to your body. Your body has a great wisdom. And if you focus on what your body is thinking it needs, which could be something as simple as sleep, rest. That's a big thing to do for your body in terms of staying healthy. Eating a good, healthy diet. That's huge, because it's not just food, it's chemistry. You know, what you're putting in your body is really affecting you on a molecular level. And that's where the science kicks in. It's like you said, it may not be a pharmaceutical that comes in a little jar that you take the lid off and pop in your mouth once a day. But I can tell you that every stalk of carrot that you put in your mouth, or every broccoli, or every green leafy vegetable, or blueberry, or whatever, is that kind of pharmaceutical. It truly is. Nobody's making big money off of it, which is the tragedy. Our farmers should be our most well-paid people. And healthy food is really important, not just any food. I mean, there's a difference. I'll give you a quick story about dairy intolerance that Dr. Rao told me, that because I didn't have a dairy intolerance, but I was asked him about these things. Well, why do you make us get rid of dairy? Why do you make us get rid of gluten? Da, da, da. And he said to me, Gerarda, think of it this way with the dairy. Back in the day, you used to have villages or communities, and there were local farms, and all the cattle farmers would have their cows, and they would milk them. And then that milk would be made into the local cheeses or butters or dairy products. And everyone in that community basically ate dairy products from like maybe 3 farms. He said, then we got into big agriculture. And he said, and your body got used to that. That was the nutrition from your area. And everybody in that community got used to that in their bodies, that food source. And he said, but then you get into big agriculture, and you're now taking the milk from dairy cows from thousands of dairy farms. And you're sending it all to some place to get homogenized and pasteurized and blended together and put into your milk. And he said, and then you drink that glass of milk, and he says, and you're ingesting such a confused milk protein that your body can't even recognize it. It's going like, what is this? I know it's dairy, but it doesn't make sense because there's just so many other variables in there, you know? And he said, and so your body starts rejecting these things because it doesn't make sense. So he said, on a superficial level, that's one way to think about how dairy intolerances started to happen, is that all of these things, these good products, cheeses and dairy products, slowly sort of got mangled.
And not only that, Gerarda, but if you think about this, and I'm talking primarily US because I've traveled in Europe too and seen how even the bigger grocery stores are. But, you know, you have things like Kraft singles that they're orange, you know, I'm sorry, cheese is white, white to yellow, right? So it's orange, it's processed, and God knows what it's made out of. And each piece is wrapped in plastic, which has, what are they called, thylamines, or, you know, poisons in the plastic because it's from, you know, oil made from petrochemicals.
Yeah, well, that's not even a cheese. That's mostly an oil-based product wrapped in plastic, which is about as toxic as you can put in your body. So, you know, there is that. And that gets back to the stressors, you know, the detoxifying of your body, becoming aware that, you know, plastics do give off things into your food that you don't necessarily want, that are toxic. So, you know, I'm much more conscious now what I store my food in, what I cook my food in. I mean, these are all health choices, and that's a little more complicated than just saying, oh, give me a pill or give me an injectable and hopefully my symptoms won't bother me. But that's just getting yourself to be asymptomatic. I sort of wanted to be healthy. It's a little more work, but it's a richer life. You know, so you can walk, you can do all these things that you thought you weren't going to be able to do, you know, because you're truly healthy. Your bones are healthy, your skin is healthy, your organs are healthy. So That's
Let me
all.
ask you too, when you say you're healthy, compared to when you were diagnosed, what about your brain function and your clarity? Because you mentioned you got very overwhelmed and confused because Dr. Tom O'Brien was talking about the idea of, leaky gut and even leaky brain, because I got on a webinar with him last week too, where he talked about, Alzheimer and dementia and Parkinson's, I should say, are forms of an autoimmune disease, and those can also be tied to the gluten in the diet and causing the leaky gut or the leaky brain. And no one talks about this really, and they think you're a little cuckoo if you start talking about those things. But he was talking about studies where patients that had schizophrenia were taken off gluten and their schizophrenia went away. And then when they put them back on gluten, then the symptoms came back again. So there's something going on in the brain. And the reason I'm asking you, because I want to see what you say about this. I had my booster shot, in last December. And right after that, I had the doctors, I have a functional medicine doctor, and she said I had a cytokine storm because I have an autoimmune and it flared up. And I had never had any real symptoms from it, just like the commercial, and I got so scared and I just went totally off gluten. And the first thing I noticed was this sense of clarity. And then I felt like a sense of confidence, and because I didn't have overwhelm, and that to me was probably the biggest gift from going gluten-free. And it's a little bit difficult, in when you go out to people's house or you go out to a restaurant, but it's something that I can live with pretty easily. And I really, and I found options like, zucchini pasta. I bought a pasta machine for zucchini or vegetables, and it's actually very delicious. So can you talk about that? So when you left and you got these protocols, because I think that would be very helpful. And did you notice anything, like when you say the symptoms of MS went away, but did your clarity of your thinking or anything like that change?
Yeah. There's a lot to what you just said, Katana. The first thing I just want to reinforce is just all of this is really about the role of your immune system. Your immune system is hugely important. And we should do everything in our power to support our immune systems, because that's like the base. That's our fortress against disease. Even just things like colds. I mean, I'm not even talking about disease like an autoimmune disease. I'm talking about, resilience against colds and other sorts of sicknesses, and even healing. When you are injured, if you have a strong immune system, your healing response kicks in much more effectively. So that starts with your gut health, primary, which is now only really becoming a huge part of people's radar these days. When I was in Switzerland, they did a lot to support the gut health. On top of the diet, they did different protocols there to refluorestate people whose gut bacteria had gotten obliterated from drugs, antibiotics, and all of that. And that same, they call that leaky gut, but in the same way, something like that happens to the brain, which is what they refer to as the crossing between the blood-brain barrier. They were very conscious, especially in MS patients, what was going between the blood-brain barrier. And I'm sure if I had been an Alzheimer's patient or somebody with those things, Dr. Rao would have probably talked about the same rubric of things that he was looking at with regard to the brain. And so they did give you different sort of vitamin supports and substance supports for blood-brain barrier, helping rebalance that and stop those kinds of leakages, which was part of the upbuilding process, getting your body healthy again. The protocols that they put me on would be different than the other MS patients. Everybody had a slightly different protocol because everybody's body was different, right down to your diet. So what is a healthy food? And that's why when people talk about, what do you eat? I say, well, it's not about what I eat. It's about what I eat for my body. I may love eating blueberries or let's say sweet potatoes, but a sweet potato could actually not be so beneficial to you. So I'm less prone to like say all this stuff about diet other than to say a healthy diet, because I'm not a nutritionist. But I have come to learn the role of nutrition, and I know it works for my body. And I think very clearly the science points out that that will also work for you or anyone. It's just you have to find what your vulnerabilities are and not aggravate your immune system. Because as long as you keep your immune system strong, you won't even if you have a disease, like I have MS, but I don't think about it. I don't put an ounce of energy into it because I am healthy. It doesn't affect me. Do you know? So and that's why it was kind of a big choice to even come and talk to you today about this, because I don't even think of myself as an MS patient. And to get back to your point about the brain and stuff, I mean, me and my general practitioner always did a dance every year, because he was always like, what are you doing? What is that clinic? He was always suspicious of it. And he would send me off to neurologists because he's like, Gerarda, this is dangerous. You don't want to mess around. Your spinal column is a very vulnerable thing. You know, you're playing with fire, doing this alternative approach. And every year I would go to him and I'd say, I know, I love you. How are my test results? Well, your blood is miraculously good. You know, this is great. Your heart is great. Everything's great. But, you know, you really shouldn't do this. Here's a prescription to go see a neurologist. And I would dutifully tear it up. And then finally, I guess maybe about 7 or 10 years into it, it was a good long time, I went to a neurologist. And he was asking me what I was doing, because he was sort of surprised at how well I looked, considering the time span that had gone since my diagnosis. And I had literally brought one of Dr. Rao's books with me, and I gave it to him, being like all excited, like, you're a genius. I hear you're one of the best neurologists in this area here. And he threw the book back at me. He was completely dismissive. I was like, okay. So he did an examination, and I was the minute he handed the book back to me that way, I was like, I really had no respect for too much of what he had to say. So I just finished my appointment and left. And then it was a good another 5 years before I went back to another neurologist and got a brain scan. I was like, okay, let me just see what's going on here. So I got a brain scan. And when this neurologist read my brain scan, he said to me, I don't understand it. He goes, you actually don't have those exacerbations on your brain anymore. He said, you have one of the original ones and you have another one, but all the other ones are either dim or invisible. They're gone. He's like, I've never seen this before. I was like, well, no surprise to me. But he didn't want to hear what I was doing. He was just sort of like, oh, well, that's really curious.
Well, because it would destroy his paradigm he was living in.
Exactly. And so,
like, what have I been doing all these years?
Well, to address that point, Katana, literally my GP, who I love dearly, I'd say 2 years ago, because I go to him every year for my annual physical, and he said to me, you know, Gerarda, I have to say, and of course he has to talk off the record to me personally because he's a professional MD. He said, you know, I have a bunch of other MS patients, and I always listen to what you say you're doing, and you tell me these crazy things or whatever. And he goes, you're doing the best of any of my MS patients. He said, I actually feel bad that I hadn't served my other patients, you know, your information. He said, because a lot of those people are now coming down with cancers, which are side effects from some of the pharmaceuticals.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so I've dodged that completely. So whatever their status was, whether they kept their disease in remission with these things, or I don't know, because I don't really ask anybody about that approach. But it made me very sad. And it humbled me that he admitted that he felt he could have served his own patients better by maybe advancing that there was another way to approach this.
And it's sad because they don't teach what you learned in Switzerland. They do not teach in colleges in the United States. However, and I would have to go look at my notes because I took notes for Dr. Tom O'Brien's interview. And this is, check our podcast if anybody wants to Go check this out. But he started out the program talking about the 5 pillars of health, I think, and a doctor at Harvard University and Mass General, who is teaching the new medical students, the new doctors. He's teaching them that all disease begins in the leaky gut. Socrates, the gut, but the leaky gut. And he's teaching them this kind of protocol. And so hopefully the new doctors will be coming out, and maybe he can get that teaching to other universities as well. We'll have to see what happens, but I am just so thrilled that you came here and you shared this story, because it's one thing to listen to a doctor or an expert on a show, but when you have nothing to gain, you're not selling anything. This is not network marketing, right? I mean, this is just your life.
I mean, I think that's the thing, also I'm not a big fighter. I mean, I think that kind of is, I hear you talking about the pharmaceutical and we have to fight them or whatever, but I just don't give them energy. The same way I don't give MS energy. I'm all about healing and upbuilding. That's my big takeaway, that, if you embrace your journey, yeah, it's scary to be diagnosed with anything. And this stuff is real. Cancer's real, MS is real, disease is real. But instead of going to that place of fear and starting a war, especially a war with your own body that's already at war with itself, right? It has chronic inflammation. It's at war with itself. That it just seems that it served me so much better to just stop and be kind to myself and embrace my body and know that it's not perfect, but that doesn't mean I can't live a healthy life, that there are other choices we can all make. And like Dr. Tom, addressing that I might have a leaky gut, addressing that I might have a vulnerability, addressing that I might have a genetic predisposition. And that's okay. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean you have to be burdened with fear. That there is a whole world of practitioners now who are coming on board. Dr. Rao has spent the last 10 years trying to teach people biological medicine. He really views his role as a teacher now, not just a practitioner, because this approach works. And no, it's not a big moneymaker when you're recommending a better diet or more conscious living to create less stressors in your life. This is not a big money-making enterprise, really. Mm-hmm. But getting to this place has been phenomenal. And I'm so overjoyed that this conversation is even happening. Because I remember back in the day when I would try to have this conversation, everyone would be like, it's a spa, you're playing with fire. I don't know what you're doing. This is crazy. You're just going to destroy yourself. And thank the heavens, it's turned out to be the exact opposite. And I've seen many other people, not just me, who are benefiting from this approach. Yeah. Everybody's a little bit different, but so many people are benefiting now.
Well, Gerarda, thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming here and sharing this. I'm sure you've helped so many people with this story of inspiration.
I hope so, Katana, because, good health is precious. It's really precious. And I just am so grateful to the people in my life that led me to a life of embracing the good things that are available. And thank you for the opportunity to share it with people now. And thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Okay. So everyone, I want to thank you for joining us today for this wonderful, wonderful story, how Gerarda healed herself. If you would like to be on our mailing list so you know when we have special guests like this coming up, then please come to joinsmartwomen.com and you'll get our monthly theme-based e-zine. You will also be invited to the Smart Women Academy, and our e-zine, when it comes out, has all kinds of wonderful goodies in it besides who's going to be on the show. So share share our programs with your loved ones. When you come to the podcast, make sure that you subscribe and you like it, and as well as come to smartwomentv.com. And you can watch the show live. So thanks for being here again. Stay healthy. And until our next show, go out and live with more purpose, passion, and prosperity. Smart Women Talk is brought to you by Smart Women's Empowerment, a 501c3 nonprofit project of United Charitable. Music by Bill Lucas from his album, When It Rains. Available on Apple Music and Spotify. Catch us wherever you listen to your favorite podcast, and be sure to join our free community at joinsmartwomen.com to access all our free Smart Women resources.